Hi, this is Eamon from Evoker, and in this video I'm going to show you how to use NDO to generate a normal map from a texture. So to begin with, I've got a nice hand-drawn texture here which was provided by another tutor, and I want to run this through NDO to generate a normal map and a couple of different other maps to help really push the visual appeal of any kind of texture that you might be using. So to begin with, I want to start up NDO here, and I want to start up 3Do. Now I'm going to move 3Do off to the side just a little bit here, and I want to come back to the NDO window. And there's a couple of techniques we can use to generate a normal here, but I'm going to show you how to use a photo normal preset. So from this drop down menu just up in the right corner, come down to photo normal presets, and this is going to open up a long list of different preset types that you can use to apply to a texture. And you'll get different results depending on the preset that you use. So for this texture, because it's like a large cobblestone texture, I want to choose one of the brick types just to begin with. And there's a couple of options here, but for this one I want to use the herringbone brick. And the reason why is because some of these bevels are quite nice. It's got very smooth surfaces on the top. The sharp brick is not a bad option either, but the problem is I don't want to use too many sharp edges because this is the kind of texture you would find on the ground. So a surface that has been walked over quite a fair bit and is very worn down, and I think the herringbone brick suits this a lot more. So I've got my preset selected now, and the next setting I want to make sure is turned on is, because this is a tiling texture, I want to make sure is tileable is turned on. You do have the option of choosing no edge bevel, so if this is not a tiling texture but you don't want the edges of the image to be beveled out, make sure no edge bevel is turned on. But for this example, is tileable is turned on. Pre-process is just going to process this image into a black and white image, so it's simulating a height map. I'm going to leave this off for this example. So once I've got these settings all done, I'm going to choose my active dock button here. And you'll notice in 3Do the texture loads, and then you should see the normal map loading once it's generated. Now this isn't looking too amazing just yet, and the reason why is because this is a generic conversion. Now if I press the spacebar in 3Do and open up the object presets here, I want to choose the hollow cylinder preset. And I want to just rotate this around so I get a nice mix of lighting across the object as I'm working on it. So from the right to the left, I've got some nice bright highlights over here, got a good midground here, and some decent shadows here, and then the Fresnel effects coming in from the side here. So this is good to work on. It's not too pretty at the moment because this is a very generic conversion here. So what we can do is, coming back to NDO, you can see we have all these different settings here. So we can change the base separation, we can change the extreme bevels and so on. Now what I want to do is basically take what I've got here and tone a lot of it down. It's beveling out too much, it's too rounded, the fine details aren't sharp enough, and there's just a lot of changes that I'd like to make here. So in the NDO window, I just want to change some values here. So I may need to leave base separation up just to get that kind of largish detail, and just sort of start turning these down and tweaking these as I go. So extreme bevels is probably causing a lot of the roundness here. So depending on what you want from this normal map, you can change these settings differently. A really good technique that I was shown was turning everything down and starting from 0 and turning them up each one by one. Now this is something that you probably see in the landscaping tutorials from Rich. Now if you start turning these settings up, you'll actually see what each individual one does, and it's a good way to kind of determine which settings you want to keep on, which settings you want to turn off, which settings you want really high, and which ones you want really low. So I can see from here, I'm probably going to keep the extreme bevels somewhere around the middle, I think I might turn the medium detail to sort of sit where it is now, and probably the fine detail as well, just a little bit of that. It's creating a bit too much sharpness in the tops. So I'm going to put the fine detail at halfway. I'm going to turn the medium detail up. I want the smooth base to be about halfway as well. And you can see that's sort of creating these sort of channeled effect at the top of the brick. And the extreme bevels, I'm just going to creep this one up slowly, since that's going to be a lot of roundness, and then start turning up the base separation here. And this is going to introduce a lot of noise, which we don't really want here, but we want to kind of get the detail from this texture to be represented in the normal map. Not too much. One of the hardest things is showing restraint when you're generating normals, and not to, you know, crank everything up and sort of go, oh yeah, this is cool, because this is really noisy. There's a lot of noise going on with this texture, and because there's so much noise, it's actually making it look a bit more like plastic than brick. So I want to kind of keep these settings down, just keep things subtle. The normal map is not going to lend a huge amount of detail. It will make a huge difference to the base texture, but it's not going to be where all your detail comes from. So I'm going to get a lot of detail out of the next maps that we're going to generate from this normal map here. So I'm going to get this to a state where I'm pretty happy with it, and then just make sure that I'm previewing all the time. And again, it's really just a case of finding the kind of balance between realism and, you know, generating fancy normals. And it's a hard thing to do, to sort of restrain yourself from, you know, just turning up all the details and making everything sort of bumpy, because generally real life doesn't look quite like this at all. It's actually quite plasticky at this point still, and that's okay because there's no actual specular map on this just yet, and we will be generating one of those shortly. So I'm going to turn down just some of these details a little bit more, just so I get a bit more of a smooth result. Okay, that's kind of where I need it to be. So I'm happy with this for now. I can always come back and change this, but what I'm going to do now is generate a couple of additional maps to really push the visual appeal of this object here. Now, to do that, I want to come and make sure that my normal map PSD is activated, and that's the one we've been working on. And from the top right corner here in the drop down menu, I want to choose, instead of photo normal presets, I want to choose the map converter. So I'm going to convert this normal map into a bunch of different maps to really push how this texture looks. Now the first one I want to do is I want to change the ambient occlusion, and I'm going to choose AO is tileable, active dock, and this is going to generate a quick ambient occlusion based on the normal maps. So you can see here in the Photoshop window we have a brand new PSD that's opened, and this is our ambient occlusion, and you can see in 3Do this has added a ambient occlusion to our image here. So there's a few settings that we need to change here. There's only 3 different values that we can change on the ambient occlusion, which is fine, medium and large shadow. So again, you want to make sure that you're not cranking these up way too high, because if you watch in 3Do it just becomes very contrasty. It doesn't look particularly appealing. It's making the image too dark. So again, you want to use restraint with this and just sort of make sure everything's turned down. You want to use the ambient occlusion for what it's there for, which is picking out detail and sort of making the big pieces of the texture pop out. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn the fine detail up, so everything's sort of getting a little bit of ambient occlusion here. And I want to slowly creep up the medium detail, and you want to avoid getting too much really dark shadowing going on in between. And the reason for that is because it's going to increase the contrast of this image, and it's going to make the colors look more saturated than they actually are. So with that in mind, it's going to very slowly turn up and down the large shadow. Yeah, I think I'll keep that down for now, and that's fine for now. I can come back and change this once I've finished with the other maps. So once you've tweaked your ambient occlusion to get something nice and something that makes your image pop a bit more, you can come back to the photo normals PSD and just make sure your normals are activated. We're going to go back to the map converter, and this time I want to generate a height map. So I'm going to use height map all round. We do have the option of height hard surface, which is good for vehicles and such, but for this one we're going to use height all round. So same thing again, choose the preset, choose is tileable and the active dock. Now we should see in 3D it's now displacing this high poly cylinder based on the height map here. Now you can see this is probably a little bit too wild. This is not something that you would use in a game. It just looks too crazy for this kind of texture. You might use these kind of extreme values with like a cliff texture maybe if you really wanted to push out an object like this, but for this kind of texture it just doesn't work. So keep in mind this is a generic process at the moment, and we can fine tune everything over here in NDO. So you can see here the curve of the sliders just going up to ultra extreme heights, and that's represented in how this is displacing now. So I want to start from here and just start turning everything down because this is just way too noisy. Now this is starting to look a bit better, so I really want to drop this curve of these sliders just a bit, just to eliminate lumpy details but still keeping these really big chunks. So I want to kind of keep the ultra extreme height just up a little bit and then slowly turn this back up again. Now using the extreme height, I want to slowly turn this back up again. I just don't want too much small lumpy detail, and this is getting pretty good. And let's see what very large, and yeah, very large seems to be a good choice here. It's making the entirety of the bricks displacing quite further without making it super lumpy. So this is another case why you don't want to overdo the normal maps, because if you have a displacement map, this is actually going to take care of a lot of the 3D effect that you want to go for with a 2D texture. So this is looking pretty good now. I can come back and tweak this again like all these other maps. So if I want to change the normals, I can come back to the normal PSD and I can start tweaking stuff here, and you can see there it's updating in real time. So as you're working on textures, it's important to kind of come back and forth and make changes to the normals, make changes to the ambient occlusion as you keep adding maps into your material here. So this is a combination of multiple types of maps, so technically it is a material in the viewport here. So I'm just going to change my normals just a little bit, and I don't want too much detail, but I want to kind of try see if I can smooth out some of this beveling a bit. Just add a little bit of more definition to the actual bricks themselves, and that seems to have worked. So I'm getting a lot more flat edges around the borders of the bricks here, which is what I want. Now I'm just going to go back to my displacement map, and I'm going to give it a little bit more large height. That's probably a little bit too much, so I'm going to turn down the other extreme values just to bring this back in. So this is only going to expand the displacement on the very large height frequency. while it's sort of peaking out here, and it's not going any larger than here. Can probably turn up the large height just a little bit to smooth things out a bit more. Yeah, you can see that's going a bit too high. Yeah, this is looking better now. You can see now I'm getting this sort of really big broad detail, and it's a little bit lumpy still. I'd probably tweak this down just a little bit more just to make it a bit more subtle. And just sort of slowly creep up some of the details like the large pits, just to make sure that I'm getting those big chunky bricks, which is what I want. Okay, so now that I've tweaked my maps again, I'm going to come back to the normal map, and I'm going to come back to the drop down menu in NDO, and I'm going to choose the map converter. And for the final map, I want to make a specular map here. So same settings as before, choose your preset, choose your tiling type, and hit the active dock button to generate your next map, which is, you should see the speculars in between the bricks be cut down a lot more now. There we go. So we're getting a lot more focused specularity on this texture now, and you can see that's reflected in the brand new specular map that we just made. And the specular map works a little bit different to the rest of the maps, and that's because you generally don't want to turn everything down to begin with, because you can see what I'm doing here is just not what you want to do. It can help to sort of understand what each piece does, but you can get some pretty crazy results by doing this. So I'm just going to go through and turn up my ambient occlusion, so you can see the AO depth, and you can see this is going to cut down on the details in between the bricks quite a bit. Now same with the edge contrast, and that should just be like an overall dampener, and you can see it's killing off a lot of this detail in between the bricks, which is what I want. And the same with the volume contrast, and of course you can change the volume. See, this is going to make it a lot more contrasted. And I want to change the cavity. You can see the cavity map is basically making a lot of these sharper edges here, and I want to get rid of those and just sort of make them a bit more polished off. Now you can see here how this has affected this map overall. It's created quite a sharp and focused appearance to these bricks. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to this image, so I'd probably just go through and start hand painting maybe some stuff over these bricks just to get a bit more of a focused appearance to the way that the specular is casting on the object. But for now, what I can do is come to the materials section in 3D, which is just here, and I can just tweak the material settings here just a little bit, just to sort of make it a bit more like how it would be in a gaming environment. And you can see that's a lot better now. It's still a little bit plasticky, so I'm going to crank up the gloss just a little bit, just to make it a bit more sharper, turn down the spec a bit more. There we go, this is looking a bit better. So we're getting nice subtle shading effects without losing too much of the original texture. Now that's the most important thing, is now that once you've added the specular map to your set of materials here, it's actually going to look more like the original texture than it does with the displacement map on and the normal map on. And this is actually a good thing. You don't want to go too far away from your original texture in terms of appearance and style. And you can see now this has actually created a very nice semi-realistic texture, at least something that's representative of realistic lighting conditions, even though it's based on a hand-drawn texture, which is exactly what I wanted here. So once you've finished with this, and that's the final step for this tutorial video, you want to go through and save off all your different PSDs as whichever image you prefer. So I want to save off this as a normal TGA, save these off as my various different maps, and you can then use these in UDK, UE4, Unity, whichever gaming engine you want. And that wraps up this tutorial video for now, so have fun generating your maps and creating normals.